Watching them try to figure out what was going on, it was like you pour water on a computer and it short circuits.
Why don't you speak your language?
You're not Ashkenazi, are you? And they literally pulled me from being able to participate.
I know that I'm not connected to this term called heritage language. Heritage language, which is used to identify languages other than the dominant language or languages in a given social context.
I don't speak Hebrew and I don't speak Malay, and I've always felt like I was situated on the outside for not speaking those languages and not being able to connect with people.
I don't speak Japanese at all, except I learned kawaii and kirei. That's all I said the entire time I was in Japan.
Most of my Chinese family can't speak English. It was kind of more out of necessity to keep up with Chinese, so I could have a relationship with my grandfather that was beyond just like little sign language motions here and there.
My Korean is pretty shaky. I feel like I can speak like maybe a 4-year-old. I can kind of converse casually with my family where, you know, I can make all sorts of errors and be okay, but I'm really not comfortable speaking to new people in Korean. In terms of Hebrew, I really feel like it not only unlocked my feeling of being accepted and part of the community and engaged, but for me, it has so much to do with my religious observance and being able to really understand and appreciate the different concepts that come up.
For me personally, I don't feel secure enough in speaking Tagalog because my pronunciation is really bad. And I really don't have an excuse because my father is white and he speaks like perfect.
My Asian heritage language would be Cantonese, and I don't speak Cantonese. So I know like swear words in Cantonese, and I know like swear words in Yiddish. And I like know some Hebrew. I grew up speaking Spanish and English, but I also don't speak it like a native speaker. I speak it like a child of immigrants, which is like another like, oh, like if I have to prove my Latinidad in spaces, it's like, I don't speak Spanish perfectly and I'm scared to do it.
Language has always been taught to me as sort of the key to strongly being able to identify with both of my cultures. Whether that's right or not, I personally don't think it is, but I internalized that at a pretty young age.
Definitely agree that language is totally the key to feeling more part of the community.
I feel like language is something that can really connect you to your identity and your culture.
I personally think that language is the best gift you can give someone. That being said, I am a Hebrew school and Chinese school dropout. I begged my parents to quit both, and I'm really sad that they let me now that I'm older and realize the importance of both of those things.
My parents put me and my brother in a Mandarin after-school program, even though our whole family speaks Cantonese, so my brother and I felt largely left out during family gatherings.
I went to Chinese school Saturday mornings for 3 years. I can say 2 words in Mandarin. My sister, who's also Asian, she was also adopted. She went, we were so bad.
The school was made for kids who spoke Mandarin at home, but that wasn't me and my brother. We spoke English at home. I always felt like the dumb white kid because I struggled so much.
Neither of my parents knew any Mandarin. We were on our own, so we'd go back to school and have learned nothing.
I went to a Ashkenazi Hebrew school. There was a kind of understanding that most of the people there spoke some degree of Yiddish. I know schlep, I know schwitz, and the swears, but actually being able to like say a full sentence is not in my lexicon. I could remember very clearly being at Hebrew school. There was a play where like for 5 minutes people were speaking in Yiddish. I'm half Ashkenazi, so I'm like, just explain to me what the heck I'm supposed to be saying, and can somebody please tell me what this means? And the Hebrew school teacher looked at me and just said, oh, right, you're not Ashkenazi, are you? What are you? And they literally pulled me from being able to participate.
One of the reasons I went to a Jewish private school and decided to do that when I was 12, my parents were like, no, that's a commute, like it's too far away. And I said, but I want to learn Hebrew. It sounds like a cool language, and it's a language that connects you to a larger Jewish community in some ways.
You don't really look like anyone here. If you can chant as fluently as the best student in the class, then maybe you'll fly under the radar a little bit more. I remember sitting in synagogue and chanting extra loud. I was like flexing my Hebrew, and that made me feel like I could skate on by.
I did go to Jewish day school, and so I learned Hebrew for 10, 12 years. If I am connected to any language other than English, I am connected to Hebrew. In practice, I'm not speaking Hebrew on my day-to-day, and I run into it when I have to find a text in a history class that happens to be in Hebrew, or when I am at synagogue for the 2 or 3 times a year I go.
When people see me and I look like ethnically ambiguous, people are like, okay, so what are you? And then I tell them. The first question afterwards is always, oh, so do you speak Japanese? And I have to say, like, I don't. And sometimes I feel like shame, like I'm not really Japanese. People put language to identity so closely.
I've never really gotten questions about if I knew Hebrew. It's always Mandarin, like from everybody across the board, because it's expected of me.
Or when people think that I should be speaking Mandarin, who are white, they're like, why don't you speak your language? One time I was at the airport, I was like going from Newark Airport to JFK or something like that, and this guy was like, ni hao. I'm like, hi. He's like, didn't you just visit your family in China? I'm like, no, I didn't, and I also don't speak Chinese. And he's like, but don't you want to know your culture? And I'm like, you just assumed so many things about me.
Going to Israel, there's like heightened security, and sometimes they'll like ask if you know any Hebrew, and I do know some. I always feel like they probably test me a lot more because of the way I look, and also they know your name, and they always ask, oh, Tamura, like, where is that from? And then I always feel like really small, and I have to prove my Judaism even more.
If people expect this of me, why am I expecting it of myself? Like, I should take the pressure off myself to be conforming.
People definitely like to put labels and see you as like the Jewish girl in an Indian crowd, or like the Indian girl in the Jewish crowd. You always feel a little off balance, and I think it's very rare to find that niche where you're like in your happy median and feeling more centered.
I've been made to feel less accepted in a group based on my ability to speak the language.
I do feel like, especially in the Japanese community, there's a lot of pressure to speak the language, and if you don't, then it's kind of hard. I tried to join the Japanese club at my school, and I just remember feeling super left out because everyone spoke the language and formed their own group. There are these groups that form of people that can speak the language and people that can't speak the language.
Sometimes when I'm in Indian community that's not my family, people are weirded out that I'm Indian and my Hindi is like level 1, speak 5 words. That sometimes can feel more of like an internal feeling of guilt. But also it's so typical of people that are American born that I don't think it impacts so much.
One time there was 2 like Chinese ladies who came up to me in the grocery store, and they had yogurt in their hand. I don't know what they said, but I'm assuming it was like, what does this say, you know? And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't speak Mandarin. And then they like whispered to each other something. They're saying something about me like, oh, this American girl doesn't speak Chinese. Made me feel really uncomfortable.
There have been times where I try to sprinkle in some of that language into my speech, and if there are other Malay women around, particularly the aunties, they would say like, oh, you're so cute trying to speak our language. There's this very distinct barrier of, oh, that's like a cute pet hobby that you're trying to participate in, not this is equally your heritage that you're trying to include yourself within.
Before we were making our plans to go to Japan, my mom was just being so weird about going. She was just being really hesitant and like dodging the question all the time. And I was like, why are you being so weird? Why don't you want to go? And I think the reason why, and she'll never admit it, was because she's really insecure that she does not speak Japanese either. That was going to be a big insecurity for her.
I do feel that I am tested more as an Asian Jew, whether that's like reciting prayers for Hanukkah or knowing names of dim sum in Cantonese.
But a lot of the Baharian Jews that are coming over now, and there's a big community over in Queens, they speak Russian and they write everything out in Russian. God forbid I want a recipe, I have to read Russian. So it's definitely kind of kept me from connecting to that community because it's like, it's a whole other language and almost a whole different culture depending on when people immigrated through.
What happens to a lot of immigrant families is it's discouraged that the kids learn the language, so everyone just shifts to English.
My dad's side of the family was kept from passing on the language for multiple reasons. When they got to America, it was the 1950s in New York City, and there was not a Baharian community, and the Jews who were there looked at them and said, you don't speak English? What kind of a Jew are you? And excluded them completely.
I honestly feel like if we still lived in California and I was around around a bigger Filipino community that I might have been more secure in learning more Tagalog.
Sometimes they ask, oh, does your dad speak Japanese? And he doesn't know any Japanese. My grandma was also born in California. I'm not sure if she knows. And my assumption, there's probably a lot of shame if she did speak Japanese, because growing up with internment camps and not wanting to be proud of your Japanese American identity. So she didn't pass that on to my dad or his two sisters, and I certainly didn't know any, and I feel really sad about that.
My mother grew up speaking English her whole life, and that's probably part of the reason why she never felt the need.
My mom was born in Bangkok and so obviously grew up speaking Thai, but my dad grew up speaking Portuguese. Neither of them learned the other's language, and so neither of them bothered to teach me their language. They're like, oh, it's not going to be useful in the home. And so I ended up with neither of them, which at least means that I don't feel like I'm leaning one way or the other with the way I connect with languages.
I did speak a little bit of Cantonese at home with my mom, but it was really hard in a mixed race household. So we always used to just speak English in the end.
My mom can't speak Hebrew. My dad speaks it fluently, but he and his entire generation were very much like, no, they have to be Americanized. Like, we have to make sure that they speak English, and we're not teaching them anything else.
My dad knows how to speak Mandarin and Cantonese. He has his heritage language because he grew up in Singapore and Malaysia. And knowing that my mom knows Hebrew but doesn't speak it to us, this is just the American dilemma for a lot of kids of immigrants and kids of families that are in the minority.
For 9 months, I took a gap year in Israel and tried to learn Hebrew, and it didn't really work.
I actually did sign up for a Hebrew for Beginners class because I thought that might be a fun way to spend my time in the pandemic.
Language to me is a huge passion. I am so in love with learning new languages.
I'm in this never-ending process of trying to pick things up, but I think it's definitely harder being someone in my 20s already and trying to either start from scratch or keep up this constant effort of learning these languages. And I think it can be done, but it's certainly a struggle that I'm trying to overcome a little bit.
I'm really, pushing hard to try to get to a good place of Hebrew. I just know that not only will it make me feel certainly more secure, in terms of my Jewish identity, but it will really help me actually live as a Jew more fully.
Actually, last summer, I decided, you know what? I should learn Greek, because I was always like, I should learn a language. I didn't learn Chinese. Now I feel bad. Sorry, my dog is barking. And then I was like, well, I didn't say what language. I could learn any language I want. So I started learning Greek, and it was golden because I worked at Starbucks at the time, and the customers, some of them could be very racist, and they were like, oh, do you speak other languages? And I was like, yes, I speak Greek. Watching them try to figure out what was going on, it was like you pour water on a computer and it short circuits.
Even though language is obviously really important in the abstract, for me in practice, I feel like I get enough connection with Thai culture, I get enough connection with Jewish culture, even with Brazilian culture, without having to necessarily speak any of those languages. And I do want to learn them. I think they're beautiful languages, but I feel like I can have an authentic and real connection without necessarily knowing those languages.